Hello and welcome. As we've done in the past, we're looking at my tracking spreadsheet for my worm bins, and I was just preparing to go downstairs to tend to a couple of my bins. In a couple of the cases, I was starting to wonder if it might be time to start switching over to a horizontal migration pattern, because I noticed that one of my bins was now at the day 80 age, or it's almost 3 months old now, and it started to make me wonder how you know how soon I should consider switching to the horizontal migration pattern. So in the case of this 80-day-old bin, it's been fed 11 times now. It's gotten fed on an average of 7.3 every 7.3 days or so. I started wondering what's the average time that I normally wait before I initiate a horizontal migration. So I started messing around with the data on this spreadsheet, and I actually populated a couple new columns over here on the right side. You'll notice the H1, H2, and even H3 columns, because in certain cases I've actually had bins where I've initiated a third horizontal migration where the food was placed onto one or the other edge of the bin to start encouraging the worms to sweep across the span of the bin. As an example, these three bins that eventually reached an age of 189 days. These were harvested just less than a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, back in March. So these bins had had their first horizontal migration initiated at day 85, and then later, 27 days later, I had initiated a sweep back, another horizontal migration, and then another one after another 58 days. So, and I guess that's the reason I was looking at the day 80 age as maybe the time to think about setting up a horizontal migration in this oldest of my bins. And another little thing that I did up here was that I did average the age. You can see I do have some lower numbers up here. If you look at some of these other bins where, for example, this one had only aged 41 days before I had set up a horizontal migration. But you'll also notice that was the shortest bin that I ever had, and it was the shortest time span. It was actually harvested after only 72 days, which is unusually short period of time. I don't remember the conditions that led up to that, but it does seem like my average for setting up a horizontal migration is in that 107-day age range. So the fact that I'm at 80 days now, I don't know if it's necessary yet, but I'm going to evaluate my bin when I get down there to feed it in a few minutes. But let's also take a quick look at this graph that I had set up here. I spent a little bit of time on this morning just so I can sort of get a visual aid to say, hey, if I was thinking about the oldest bin that I've had so far, over here, 193 days. In that case, I had only set up one horizontal migration, and it only occurred at day 160. So that's considerably longer, even though in previous bins I had set up horizontal migrations even earlier. So in this case, a bin that had gone 155 days had its horizontal migration set up at day 107, etc. so on. Down here I'm illustrating the bin that had aged 189 days and was set up for its first horizontal migration at day 85, went 27 days until horizontal migration number 2 was set up, and then it was another 58 days until horizontal migration 3 had gotten set up, and then there was just another few days here at the end before the bin was actually harvested. So a lot of people have been asking, when do I harvest, or when do I know to switch to horizontal migration mode? And I just thought I would try to illustrate some of the history I've had with my bins on that topic. So alright, enough of the spreadsheets. I'm going to go grab a bag of food, and I'll be down in the wormery in a few minutes. Let's turn the camera back on when we're down there, and we'll feed a few of my bins. Okay, so we're going to begin the feedings with my newest bins here. These were just launched May 3rd. and that was only a couple weeks ago. This is only going to be the second feeding for these bins. Normally I'll use a used coffee filter as the indicator of where the feedings are occurring in my bins. So when we get around to covering everything up again, we'll go ahead and we'll make sure there's a marker to show where the feeding zones are happening. None of my bins are in a horizontal migration mode yet, so all my bins are currently being fed right down the middle, which is how I always begin. And it's only after some time has lapsed that I start trying to encourage the worm population to start sweeping back and forth across the contents of the bin. So now, the last time we were in here, we found something similar to this. The fact that this one just broke in my hand must mean that it's getting broken down and that it's falling apart. If it was plastic, I don't believe it would do that. So I'm going to try to keep it together near each other, but I'm not going to remove it. Maybe it is just a very rigid plasticky type material. I just can't identify it, so I don't know exactly what it is. No worries. I'm just going to set it here, and we'll just be sure to keep it with everything when we're reloading the feeding zone. This is pretty cool. This is mango seed. You can see how much they love getting down into the middle of this thing when the seed is still inside of the shell. They just go bananas for eating that seed contents. So it's pretty interesting to watch how the worms consume different types of foods, how they're drawn to certain things. And speaking of being drawn to things, here's a piece of watermelon, which I thought would be history by now, because usually they just go to town on watermelon. But for whatever reason, maybe because it was face down, I'm not sure, they're kind of taking their sweet old time working it down. Here's a banana peel. So here you can see some cardboard remnants from the original bedding from when this bin was originally built and launched. So I think from the perspective of bedding, we're probably still good. So all we'll do is, now that we've sort of inspected how the existing foods are getting worked down, why don't we just return those existing food items back down? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this face up so that maybe it's an access issue. Then I'll put this weird piece of plastic-ish material, whatever it is, here face up as well. And we'll get this down here in the middle too. So we'll just we'll bring in the food items. It's now corn season again, so I'm going to go ahead and give them a whole piece of corn cob. Here's another piece of that for them. A handful of whatever this is. We got some cucumber or zucchini, whatever that is, peelings, some mushroom. I guess some parts of a mushroom. And since I did create myself a whole bunch of eggshell grit, I'm going to go ahead and pop a little bit of that into each of these bins that I'm feeding today, as well as some of my traditional used coffee grinds. Alrighty. So, I like the moisture content in this bin. It looks really good. Everything's really damp, and I think that's got a lot to do with the fact that there's two pieces of cardboard resting on top of the bin. I think it's a good idea that I'm covering these bins with two sheets of cardboard nowadays. Alright, cool. So like I said, I'm just going to take this coffee filter, and that's usually my traditional indicator of where I'm feeding, so I'm going to get back to doing that in this new bin. I just forgot to add that last time we were in here when I did the first feeding. Get this thing covered back up nicely. might also help that this lid is extremely well fitted. It's almost like a perfect tailored fit. It doesn't even drop down to the bottom. There's probably a little bit of air beneath it, so it's a good tight fit. All right, we'll get the other bin, same age as this one on the table. Alrighty, so this bin is same age, same setup pretty much, right? 2 cardboard sheets, piece of newspaper on top, and no coffee filter, so we'll just have this coffee filter for marking the feeding zone on this one. Now in this bin we've been seeing sprouts. Numerous sprouts of different types, it seems. I'm not sure what type of, maybe pumpkin and maybe some cantaloupe seeds that are sprouting. And I mean, it's springtime, so it's that time of year. I'm not sure if it's like a time of year sort of a thing, or just maybe the fact that it's an ideal condition for them, nice and moist and nutrient-rich material for the seeds to try starting in. So we should expect to see very similar conditions in these 2 tubs, these 2 bins, because they were both launched at around the same, on the same day actually, with a similar number of worms and fed last time with similar food. So I think we're going to probably see here like a half a mango seed getting consumed from the inside out. And here I'm assuming that this does look like some of the watermelon rind left over, but in this case I don't see any signs of the watermelon rind like we did in the last bin. And I cannot say for certain. This is a piece of cantaloupe rind. All the fleshy material's been stripped of it. So this bin, I would almost have to say, is either more densely populated, which I believe is the case, because it is a slightly larger container than the other one. So I believe I did add more worms. I made a conscious decision to place what I thought was a greater number of worms in this bin when I populated it. So it does seem like they're burning through their food supply maybe a little bit more quickly than the other bin. So all right, we'll keep that in mind. Here too, we're going to give a couple corn cobs, some mushroom, some more odds and ends from the kitchen. Here's the stem of a head of romaine lettuce. The same treatment as before. Throw in some nice grit and coffee grinds. And then we'll just throw these pieces of partially eaten food that we found earlier back down in there too. Like what I'm seeing here. And you'll notice here too, very nice moisture levels. So I think it's a good thing that I'm covering up with 2 sheets of cardboard nowadays as opposed to simply using 1. All right, very nice. Onward. Okay, so if you're keeping track and if you've been watching my channel, you're going to notice a little bit of an upgrade here. Nice new cover that complements this existing piece of cardboard. And now we've even got a 3rd sheet of cardboard here. So this one's got quite a bit of protection in terms of not allowing moisture to seep out. And for those of you who have been watching this bin, this is that bin that had a lot of minute pieces of cardboard covering the top. So I figured now that I've got a nice new lid, it was safe to remove all those cardboard bits out of here, so that's why you don't see them here on the top. But what I did was I set them aside, so they're right here in this container, waiting to get reused. If I'm not mistaken, these bins did start to look like the bedding that was down under the feeding zone was more or less depleted. So I figured this would be a good time during this feeding to supplement the bedding underneath the feeding zone. So we'll throw some of that cardboard down at the bottom before we feed. This is not even the oldest of my bins. This is the oldest of the bins is still coming up. But if you look at the material in this bin, I mean, it really looks like it's come very far along. Usually there's little leaf matter laying around. Usually down here in the middle where the last feeding occurred, you'll find food chunks, and this might be a little piece of cantaloupe rind. Or maybe it's cardboard, it's hard to tell. But there doesn't seem to be many signs of, if any signs of the previous feeding. So this bin really seems like it's chugging along quickly. And it makes me wonder if it's time to initiate a horizontal migration and sort of start setting the stage for winding down this bin. Maybe we'll do just that. We'll just go ahead and we'll pick one side or the other. Let's just take a peek at both sides to see how they look. Looks pretty nice over there. Let's take a peek over here as well. It's a really busy bin everywhere you look. You don't even have to go right to the feeding zone to see tons and tons of worms everywhere. So I don't think it makes much difference where we feed. But as long as we're on this side, I think we'll just do it here. We'll go ahead and we'll drop in some fresh bedding, using maybe half of that cardboard that we plucked off the surface of this bin. And we'll rest that down at the bottom so that we can put in a nice initial feeding on horizontal migration number 1 for this bin. So let's go ahead and take some of this cardboard that we took out of the other bin. I'm not even going to go crazy chopping it into small pieces. Grab a couple pieces, drop them in the bottom, and we can add some food. I'm wondering if I should also include a little bed of leaves in there as well in addition to the cardboard. Sure, why don't I do that? So we'll grab a handful of this mushroom, lettuce, cucumber, zucchini, whatever it is, variety of different food items. Ooh, wow, that's a lot. No big deal. I'm sure they're going to like that. Just plop in the used coffee grinds that we traditionally use at each feeding if we remember to do so. And then we can cover up. Can't remember if this bin was maybe in the 50-day range or whatever it said on the spreadsheet. It's really coming along nicely. Okay, so this is the last of our bins to be fed today. Initiated on February 26th. So that's March, April, it's now May 17th or so. We're coming up on 3 months old. I believe this is the bin that, yeah, we talked about earlier in terms of it being 80 days old. And the one thing that's sort of making me wonder about the last bin, was the last bin also missing a marker? I might have to go back there just to mark it in terms of where the feeding zone was. In fact, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do that now so I don't forget. Okay, I'm back. So, I am kind of a creature of habit, so it's funny that that bin did not have a marker for the feeding zone. because I'm usually pretty consistent. But now we're back on track. So now this bin was also being center fed, and we're also going to go into consideration mode now to see if it does make sense to set this one up for horizontal feeding as well. Here's another mango seed, but it's not quite as far along as the other one is. So this one's definitely not going to make it in time for the bin to be harvested. So I think some of these larger food chunks might need to be plucked out of here at some point in the near future and maybe added to one of the newer bins to give them ample time to get broken down. But for now, we're just going to keep all the food items together. And if at some point it makes sense to take food items out of this bin that might take longer to get finished, we'll do that at another time. Okay, so that's the one thing about this bin, is it does have a lot of these tougher items in it. Mango seeds, which just take longer. They take longer to break down because of their tough outer husks. And there's other things in here that look like they're taking a little bit longer. So but nevertheless, I wanted to make the judgment call on horizontal feeding or not based on the overall condition of the bin. And as strange as it may seem, I'm really questioning whether it's time or not, because it just doesn't seem like this bin is progressing the way the other bin is, that's even younger. And then maybe during the next feeding, start with this bin and use that as an opportunity to remove some of the larger chunks so that the bin can really start working its way towards completion for harvesting without any of these harder to break down food items becoming a hindrance. I'm going to start sliding some of the material off to the side here, and at the same time try to find objects. Here's the cork that we've been tracking. We've been tracking the progress of how long it might take for a cork to break down. And as I find a mango seed, and it seems like mango seeds are predominantly the thing in this bin that are taking a long time to break down. Some of them have been chopped in half, some of them are still whole. I'm going to kind of pile them up over here so that they can all be nested together into the feeding zone once we set it up on one of the edges. And then it'll be easier to pull them out next time we get to feeding this bin. Okay. I'm going to take these larger food items and just stack them up over here on the side. We'll be sure to plop them all in together into the feeding zone that we set up over on this edge. I don't know what the reason is why this bin is not really keeping up with the other bin, but it doesn't matter. Shouldn't really consider any anomalies that you find between your bins to be a problem per se, because I don't really see anything here that I would perceive as a problem. It's just a curiosity that it's not progressing as quickly as the other bin is. And maybe it's just the overall volume and the size of the bin. The other bin does seem like it's a little bit thicker in terms of the depth of the material throughout the bin, which means there's probably just a larger population of worms there to do the work. So whatever, we'll just move on. We'll use the last of this cardboard that we recycled from the last bin. And we'll start putting in all of this older food material. You can see how many mango seeds there are here. Quite a number of them. Some cut in half, some whole. The cork, I'll just keep it sort of in the center so that we stumble on it and recognize it more readily next go around. I'm not sure what this is. It's starting to soften up, whatever it is, so hopefully it's like an acorn or something. It must have snuck in here with the leaves. So just gonna start bringing some of this material back. try to better define the feeding zone along this edge here. I really like the way this material looks too. The moisture level's right where we want it to be. Let's go ahead and plop in the remainder of the food. Toss in some grit, coffee grinds. Topping, we'll introduce something that I normally don't do too much of in my older bins, which is leafy material, but that'll be alright. I like to just, switch it up sometimes. Don't have to be too rigid in our methodologies, because it does pay to be flexible and be prepared to adapt to changing conditions. Even though I don't think it's so difficult to see, we'll keep with tradition and we'll put the feeding zone marker right where it belongs, and we'll get this thing covered up. So that's about it for today, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. And please also consider subscribing to my channel. That helps things as well. So have a great day, and we'll see you back here next time. Take care, everyone. Bye.